After a long time away, I am back, and this is going to be a different video than usual. This is going to be a halfway discussion video about the various aspects of Pokemon Uranium. Up to this point, I'll be discussing the story, or at least what we know of the story at this point, some of the characters that we would have met, along with my views on the game as a whole up to now. So, I hope you enjoy. Starting with the story, Pokemon Uranium tries to go for a darker start. It introduces us to the protagonist and their parents. The focus of this backstory is Lucille, who is a scientist and primarily studies nuclear energy. She works at nuclear power plant Epsilon, along with Cameron, who is Theo's father. One day, there is an issue in the power plant, and when everyone's trying to evacuate, Lucille decides to go deeper in. Cameron can't stop her and ends up having to leave, leaving her in the remains of Power Plant Epsilon when the meltdown happens. After this event, though, Lucille went missing. This seems to have had a negative effect on Kellen, though, who wound up becoming more cold toward Tom. There is the aspect of him also becoming more dedicated to his job, but the game just says after the event he became cold and dedicated to his job. That is more of a nitpick, but it's important for something else later. Afterwards, Tom, or the protagonist in this case, is left to live with their aunt, while Kellen handles business at Bale Beach City as the chief of the Pokemon Rangers. And that's where that part ends. And this is a problem I have with Uranium, one of the many, but this is a big one I have, and it's how its story is handled. Uranium introduces us to the protagonist and their parents and tries to have story be a focus, but right after, it's just a standard Pokemon game. You meet with the professor, you meet with your rival, who in this case is Theo, and that's it. You get your starter, you battle with Theo, and then you start your journey. There's not much else for a while until Bale Beach City. Sure, there are minor subplots here or there, such as after you're done with the second gym, you have a run-in with one of Bamb'o's scientist friends who has an issue with the Pokemon speech translator. Well, has an issue with Pokemon fleeing the lab. You get the speech translator to speak to Awoten, and you find out about this weird Pokemon called Garlickid who stole the Pokemon to liberate them from human control. It's a subplot that kind of is important later, but it's not really explored much. And that's really what I gotta say for a lot of the story. The story's not explored much, even later. Well, how is that, you may ask? Team Nuclear is how. I call them Team Nuclear, but they don't have a canon name, so I'm going to go with Team Nuclear, because it fits in with Pokemon, since during the main game, you always fight an evil team. Team Nuclear is first encountered at Power Plant Epsilon, before we fight Callie, the third gym leader. We run into Kellen, our father, who ends up giving the protagonist a letter to hand to Cameron. Afterwards, we're allowed to explore Power Plant Epsilon because it is believed it'll give our protagonist some form of closure with their missing mother. You will run into nuclear Pokemon in the tall grass and in the power plant itself. I already explained how nuclear Pokemon work. They are weak to every type except themselves, but they deal super effective damage to every type but steel in itself. I already explained the issue with that, so I'm not going to go over that again. the issue I have with them story-wise is that they try to present them as threats. And the fact that they are weak to almost everything, well, yeah, basically everything except itself, they're not very threatening, they're very easy to take out, and the ones that are threatening are more bullshit than anything else. And that's mostly because their speed values are too high, or strategies you can do with them are incredibly cheap. The latter is more so one you get than one you need to fight. The other problem with Team Nuclear is that the story doesn't do much with them. You obtain burnt notebook pages in Power Plant Epsilon, but you can't read them, and you won't be able to find out what they say until later on. So that's kind of done. Once you finish Power Plant Epsilon, there's nothing left to do. You just continue on with the game. But you run into them again after you beat Callie. You help people on the beach. Well, by help, I mean take out more nuclear Pokemon, and eventually get to a boat, and you make your way toward the wheat fields, and you head toward Manaville Town. And after that, we have another encounter with them. After we beat Sheldon, we run into them again as they mess with the Bennoville power plant. So, you get to fight them again with your father this time. So that's nice. You have another run-in, and that's what Pokemon does with the evil team. You run into them over the course of the game. Now, the issue here is that, one, we don't learn much about them. The only thing we know is that they're violent and that they won't listen to trainers. Well, that and they're, I guess, considered corrupted Pokemon, but yeah. We don't know anything about them. We don't really get to speak with them. The speech translator that we have for Pokemon doesn't, well, it works on them, but all they're saying is kill the human, kill the human. So they're not really good fountains of information. So we don't really get character from them like the other evil teams had. I mean, yeah, they were minor character, but, you can't say that Team Skull didn't at least make you smile at some times. They weren't, you can't say that, Team Skull was kind of quirky, and they could make you smile, plus they had their own nice little subplot that, these are people who failed the island challenges, and they didn't want to feel like worthless, so they all banded together. Nuclear Pokemon don't have that. They don't have anything. They're not like Pokemon gangsters like as Team Rocket was. They're not like Galactic, which are trying to change the world. They're not Team Aqua or Magma, which are trying to quote-unquote help the world by harming it. They're not Team Plasma, who are led by a guy who's trying to fool everyone into thinking they're good, but they're not. Well, most of the leader's not. They're not Fleur. They don't have character. The only one who has character is the one human character who is the head of Team Nuclear. And we won't run into them until later. The other problem is that they introduce them in these spurts, but guess what? After dealing with them after the 4th gym, you're done with them. That's it. You won't be running into Team Nuclear until after you beat the 8th gym. That's it. That's when you run into the leader of Team Nuclear as well. After you beat the 8th gym. That's a problem. It means that the bad guys of the entire game don't have much influence outside of the few moments you meet them. I have no idea why they didn't just spread it out across the game. I guess because they wanted to include more weird subplots. Like, there's going to be a village of people we're going to be running into later, but we're so close to that. Well, not really close to that. But we're close enough that I'd rather show it because it's so weird that you have to see it to believe it. There's another subplot, though, involving our character and more closure, but that has its own oodles of issues. And again, it's one of those things I want to show you because you have to see it to believe why it's a problem. So what are my thoughts of Team Nuclear as a whole? As a whole, I feel Team Nuclear is a letdown. I know they're not technically an evil team, they're the antagonists of the story, but as antagonists, I feel they're a letdown. They're only introduced for a bit, and then afterwards, we don't deal with them. It's way too long of a period of time without dealing with them, and even the burnt notebook pages we find really are less about the nuclear Pokemon as a whole and more so about one specific nuclear Pokemon, and most of it's just there for closure for the protagonist. So it's not really there for even them. It's mainly there for the protagonist. I don't really have much else to say involving nuclear Pokemon because that's my issue. There's not much to say. There's no deep themes for them. There's nothing really deep about them. There's nothing really interesting I can say. I think it's a bad typing. Again, I've stated this before. I hate the fact that it's good against everything except Steel in itself, but it's weak to everything except Steel. Well, it's weak to everything except itself. The problem with that is, again, Shadow Pokemon did this much better because Shadow Pokemon will always deal ×2 damage, even if you have 2 typings. That was only in XD Gale of Darkness, but you get the point. But in Uranium, a nuclear type can deal ×4 super effective damage if you have 2 typings, one of them not being nuclear or steel. At that point, if you have nuclear or steel as your secondary typing, you'll just take neutral damage. Unless, again, if you're a pure steel type, but the only pure steel type is Garurul, and the only pure nuclear types are the non-corrupted ones. The issue I have, again, that deals super effective damage to everything is that, again, it's just a battle of glass cannons, and it's not really an issue except for 2 main boss fights, and I think that's just because how badly handled they were. Other than that, that's my view on Team Nuclear. The problem with the characters in Pokemon Uranium is that they kind of lack any form of depth, and they just end up feeling more one note than anything else. I really just have an issue with it because this is a Pokemon game that's trying to focus a little bit more on the story, and as I've explained in the story section, where not much went on, there's not much that goes on with the characters as well. I'll be going over these specific characters: Kellen, Cameron, Bamb'o, Theo, and the gym leaders. And that's really going to be it for the character segment. So we'll start off with Kellen. Kellen is the father of the main protagonist and has a very weird relationship with the protagonist. He is a father who stopped being there for the protagonist, mostly because of just due to the loss of his wife, Lucille, which has had a very bad effect on him. He only focused on his job at that point. He left the protagonist under care with his aunt, and he's not there for him as much as even he wanted to be. That's mainly because he says lines like that, like, I'm not here, I'm sorry I wasn't there for you as much as I should be. And like, he mentions how much the protagonist has grown. Kellen is presented to be coldish toward the protagonist. I say coldish. He's supposed to be cold, but I've never gotten that from any of Kellen's lines. And I think that's the issue here, is that Kellen doesn't really have a personality outside of he's the Ranger Chief and it's his job to protect Tandor. I think that's an issue in this specific case because in Pokemon, the protagonist doesn't speak. And in Uranium, they decided to keep that a trait, which is fine. You can have a father-son relationship like this with the protagonist not speaking, as long as the father is fleshed out a lot as a character. The problem is Kellen is not, and spoilers, he won't be throughout the entire game. What you see is what you're going to get, with the only differences being just minor, more small moments where he's opening up more to the protagonist, but it's nothing really great, because it's stuff you're going to see coming. Because Uranium tries to say its story, tries to like promote its story, but I feel like a lot of it is just kind of basic. And this goes again to Kellen. He doesn't say much. He doesn't do much in the story other than just tell you where to go next when you do talk to him, or just again spout that, oh, you've grown so much and I wish I was there for you more and I hope to do that in the future. That's all Kellen really does. And that's why it's an issue even talking about him, but I have to bring him up because he is one of the important characters in this story, and when one of the important characters to this story has no personality, I think that's an issue. And again, the signs that he has no personality, or at least the evidence is, again, in my videos. I have read Kellen's lines. I have shown the dialogue options with Kellen. There's not much there. And I think that's really going to be it on my segment of Kellen, because it's a really short segment, although probably not going to be probably going to be like the second shortest, because the shortest is going to be the one on Bamb'o. But yeah, that's really it for Kellen. Cameron is Theo's father. He is also close friends with both Lucille and Kellen, but more so Lucille. Cameron's entire purpose in the game really is to just act as motivation for Theo to improve. There's not much else there for Cameron, but at least by extension, it gives Cameron more to do, because the father-son relationship between Theo and Cameron is not the best around, but it's definitely there, and it's one of the few things Uranium kind of did right, but I'll talk about that more with Theo. Cameron's purpose in this plot, besides that, well, he has a purpose besides that, but it's mostly, again, like I said, for motivation for Theo. But Cameron seems to also be interested in investigating nuclear Pokemon, and that's really all you get for his character, at least right now. Similar to the other characters, there's kind of missing information, only because right now we're halfway through the story, but unlike someone like Kellen, who basically is kind of just done as a character, that's it. What I said is basically how he is throughout the entire game. And even some of the other characters like the gym leaders or even Bamb'o, they don't really have much character, but Cameron at least gets a little bit more development in the second half of the game. So credit where credit is due, although it's more of like a gold star saying you tried. Cameron's personality is weird to talk about, much like a lot of other characters in the game, mostly because the personality's there, but it's just so basic, I don't even know how to fully describe it. Cameron, in short, is there basically to remind Theo that you're a growing boy now, and you're a trainer, so it's time you need to kind of, grow up and learn to, act like a good trainer, take your losses like a man and just slowly improve as you can. Learn about the Pokemon you can catch, learn about type matchups, and learn to, make use of the fact that your starter is weak to the protagonists. He gives a lot of advice to Theo, at least for the moments you see Cameron, and he's very protective of Theo. One of the things that happens is you see when you beat Theo in a rival battle and he cries and goes running home, is Cameron will just will basically get a little angry at the protagonist at first, saying, "What did you do to my kid?" Because, he cares for Theo. You don't really get that much with Kellen, but that's because, again, you don't see much with Kellen. And in that regard, at least Cameron has some notable traits to his personality. It's mostly just revolving around trying to help people, do the right thing, and caring for my boy Theo, caring for his boy Theo. That's really all Cameron kind of does. And that's why it's hard to talk about personality in this game. Ernest Bamb'o is one of the first characters you'll meet in the game. Because he's the Pokemon professor, you will of course have the standard opening segment with him, as you would with most professors in a Pokemon game. Bamb'o has no other personality outside of the moment you see him. He just is studying Pokemon elements, aka he's studying Pokemon types, but the game tries to be cool. Bamb'o also is just there to again be a character who gives advice and tells everyone else where to go, and he'll ask the protagonist for help when needed. And that's really it for Bamb'o. He doesn't do that much for the plot other than, again, direct you and occasionally give you items for catching enough Pokemon. Bamb'o does have good items to give you, but that doesn't really translate to his character, and that's why this is a very short segment. I only brought up Bamb'o because, well, he is still a character who gets involved in the story, it's just that he doesn't do much. And that's my issue with Bamb'o, because he's really just, he's not that involved enough. And again, this is supposed to be a Pokemon game that's focused more on its story, so the professor should kind of get more involved, but Bamb'o really isn't. But a lot of professors seem to not be, they can't all be a Professor Kukui. Next. Theo is one of the only well-done characters in Uranium, and that's not saying much considering the bar is kind of low, but it's at least something Uranium did right. Theo is the rival to the protagonist, and is basically a little kid, as well, most rivals kind of are, but Theo actually keeps the personality of a little kid. As you may know, characters such as Blue/Gary, they're a bit more competitive, but they don't act like a full-blown child, save for the occasional smell you later that Blue would do in the American version. Silver is, again, a kid, but he has a more troubled past with his father, so that leads to him having a much different personality than, say, a kid of his age would have. And again, onward, each rival, while still being a child, at least doesn't fully act like one. They may have traits that kind of remind you that they're a kid, but they don't scream it in your face as much as Theo does. Theo will start the game, of course, just saying how great he is. He has his own personal fanfiction he made of himself saying how great he is. He will cry if he loses. He'll complain when things don't go his way. He'll act like kind of what most people would imagine a little kid acting. That's good because it's realistic, sort of. Not all little kids act that bad. Some do, but it's kind of realistic. But that also adds to me, that can also be a problem because it can get annoying. And that's the main issue with Theo in the beginning of the game. He's very annoying. Why do I say he's the most well-done character? Because he has a clear personality, he has character development, and he actually sticks with his development. Theo starts as a whiny kid, but each battle you have with him, he grows a bit and he learns not to cry as much when he loses. He tries to get a team set up to beat you. Every time he fails, he acts a little bit nicer towards you later on. And that's really it. At least Theo has that. And by the halfway point, he's actively trying to help save, the world with you, and he's actually congratulating you on more things you do, and he's actively happy to work with you. And when he loses with grace. That's really the main reasons why Theo's one of the only good characters in this game. Theo shows emotion when he loses his father, and it's a driving motivation for him to continue to improve. It's kind of why I say Theo's the only well-done character in the game. He has an arc. It's not a good arc, mind you. I'm not saying he's character of the year. He should deserve an award, no. But compared to everyone else, he's fine. I also want that to kind of just speak for Uranium's writing. If only one character is good, and he's not even good because he's fantastically good, he's only good because everyone else sucks. And he was given the most basic form of improvement. But again, it's there, it sticks, and that's kind of why Theo's the only real good character in Uranium. The gym leader segment's going to be pretty short. They really don't get much personality in this game. They get backstories that are just presented to you as soon as you meet them, and that's it. That's really it for the gym leaders. The only one that's slightly different is Sheldon, who you can learn a little bit more about, or at least you run into before you fight him at the gym as a part of a side quest where you see that he likes to play pranks on the farm people, along with his dislike for people in the village because it's very religious and they're happy farming and praying while, he's into science. Other than that, there's really not much else. Maria's lazy, and that's it. That's her one trait, and that's the trait that she gets to stick to. With the only extra bit of information was that she was able to become a champion. Except that she doesn't want to be a champion. And the only reason for that is, again, she's lazy. Davern likes caves. That's it. Callie was saved by a Brinor, and then became a lifeguard for that reason. I already said Sheldon. I already explained why Sheldon, is not that good either. More so, again, he's just, copy-paste from Sheldon's backstory from Big Bang Theory. And then the other gym leaders we're going to meet later pretty much follow the same idea, except maybe the 8th ones. Except, again, they don't get much either. It's just that their backstory is so stupid. It's just, it's pretty ridiculous. But it's funny, at least. It made me laugh. That's about it. And that's really it for the gym leaders. My final thoughts on the story, up to the halfway point, really is just that I feel it was handled poorly, and I feel like I'm playing filler up until the third gym. And I feel that's the best way to describe a lot of Uranium's story as a whole, is that the segments that you're supposed to be on your journey going to the gym are filler, because we're not learning much about the world. We're not learning much about the region, really. We learned some minor things here or there. We don't learn much about the characters, and the only real important moments that happen generally are whenever the nuclear Pokemon attack, and we have some time to deal with that. The antagonists are just Pokemon, save for, again, one human. I mean, there are a few other antagonists, but they're not, like, important, again, to the story. They're just not important to the story, and that's, like, issue here. So much isn't important. Like, I could have just started my entire playthrough at Cali. I could have just skipped gyms 1 and 2 and started, well, I could have shown off Garlickid, I guess, even though he's not important to the story. I could have just shown him off just for fun, but I could have started at Cali, fought to Sheldon, handled that segment, and then skipped until after the fucking 8th gym. And it would have still been around the same experience, except you would have seen less Pokemon. And again, if you're just playing for the story, that's an issue. If you're just playing for the game itself, though, well, that's something I'm going to talk about after the story segment. But as far as the characters go, a lot feel one note. Kellen just feels like he has no personality. All he's there for is just to say, oh my son, I am so sorry for being so cold, and I will try to be a better father. Cameron is, Theo, you have to improve, but, you know, I also have to save the world. I have to help you guys save the world, but Theo, I'm so glad to see you've improved. Bamb'o does nothing! And Theo is just a whiny kid until he decides no longer to be a whiny kid. But at least, again, Theo has personality, so it's not that's not fair for Theo in this case. But for everyone else, it doesn't matter. Even our villain's one note is crap. You thought maybe, what was it? You thought, I guess, Team Rocket was one note. You thought Fleur was just weird. No, you didn't see anything until you see the antagonist of Team Nuclear. When you see the leader of Team Nuclear is when you're going to see probably, in my opinion, well, not the worst villain, it's just the worst in terms of, like, no personality. There's a villain I find worse than this one, but that's only because I actually don't like the character as a character. But regardless, that's really my final thoughts on the story. It does not get better from here. It gets worse because, again, it just feels like we play through filler. The gym leaders don't get any more character. Theo's the only one who's going to grow. And, yeah, that's kind of my final thoughts on the story.
That freaky cyborg ain't no match for my dated internet reference. It's peanut butter jelly time!
There are way too many references in Pokemon Uranium. I understand some games may do this. A game I like called Undertale does this as well. I mean, it has the opera scene from Final Fantasy VI in it, and it does other references as well. But Undertale kind of presented itself a bit like that in the humor it was trying to go for. And you could argue Uranium was doing it as well, but I always viewed Uranium as the fan game that was trying to bring back older fans, or more so be a fan game for the older fans of Pokemon, and I don't really feel like it does a good job at being a Pokemon experience when a lot of the trainers are just spouting memes or internet references or just movie references in general. Like, I understand some trainers in the main series games would say weird things, but generally it would fit their trainer class. But in this game, every trainer says something weird. I mean, you have a psychic girl in Sheldon's gym with that really terrible girl gamer thing she said, and it's very, I'd say it's immersion breaking. Although, yes, someone saying something in Pokemon's immersion breaking may be funny, but I feel like Pokemon still try to present a world, and I feel Uranium's trying, but it's also trying to take us out of it at the same time. It also just makes fighting the trainers kind of, well, even more annoying, because that's something I'll talk about later, involving the trainers. But, you know, when you start the game, you get an Undertale reference. You get that from, oh, scandalous, it's Ani's sock drawer. And then you move on, and eventually you'll get other references like hit its weak point for massive damage, or like that line from Star Wars about sand, it's coarse and rough and gets everywhere. You get freaking a person in speaking with Leet speak. You get multiple Homestuck name references on a fairy. It's just, there's too many. And speaking of references, this is why I want to talk about Sheldon. Sheldon's entire backstory is nothing more than one giant reference to The Big Bang Theory. In The Big Bang Theory, there is a character called Sheldon. He, too, was also a very smart scientist who was born to a very religious family, who also happened to, I think, live on a farmland of some sort. And he, too, does not fully respect or like his family's, well, religious ways, but that doesn't stop him from, of course, having a decent relationship with his mother. But that's me getting into Big Bang Theory a bit too much at that point. The issue I have here is that even Sheldon, who is a gym leader that probably who has a little bit more backstory than the other three we fought, it's nothing more than one giant reference. And heck, your first meeting with him is helping out another character who's nothing more than a walking reference. Ripley's just a reference to Ripley from Alien, and her entire backstory is similar to Malin as well, the alien invasion part. At least that's what I got from the trivia. I remembered a bit about that from Majora's Mask. I just forgot the name. But there was a character in Majora's Mask who had run-ins with aliens, and they were also UFOs. It's just too many references. There's just too much, and that's been my issue with Uranium for a while, is it's trying too hard, I feel, to make you laugh, and at times it can work, and at other times it kind of fails. Or sometimes the reference just is weird. Like one of theirs was the Dragonite Origin thing was actually a reference to Dragon Age Origins. I played Dragon Age Origins and I didn't get that, probably because of just the name sounded way too off. But I think that's it for the reference segment. Final thoughts on that really is just, again, I don't like the sheer number, and I feel Uranium needs to do its own humor, or at least try to have trainers say other things, or people say other things in general, because most of the people are kind of bland and boring with what they say. I'm going to keep my discussion of the difficulty of Pokemon Uranium short, and that's because I want to discuss that more in my videos. So what will I discuss in this segment? Well, I'm going to discuss the experience gain and how I view difficulty, and why I view Uranium not as a challenging game, but more as a easy game with bullshit moments. I find the amount of experience you get from battles in Pokemon Uranium to be too low. They're fine when you fight the Pokemon from the main series, as their experience values are left untouched. But the Tandor-specific Pokemon, or the Tandor native Pokemon, you know, the unique Pokemon of Tandor, they have very low experience gain. You get very little experience for fighting them and winning, and that's noticeable when you fight Theo. First time you fight him, you do not level up to 6. Generally, when you beat your rival for that time, your starter will go from level 5 to level 6, and that's it. While in Uranium, you're a few points off. Why do I feel that's done? I really can only point at the fact they want Uranium to be difficult, and instead of trying to make the game hard in a sense of requiring you to use more strategy, they just made leveling harder. And I don't find that difficult, I just find that kind of fake. Well, I find the difficulty for that very fake. But overall, it's bad because I personally do fight every random encounter in Pokemon. I try not to run, and when I don't, and since I don't run and I just battle every random Pokemon I find, I end up keeping my levels fairly high. I keep my levels basically what the game wants me to be, and I don't have a problem. But in Uranium, if I do that, I will not be at a good enough level because the Tandor Pokemon don't give enough experience. So I am required to use the rematch system, which is a system I'd use normally anyway to get extra money. So it's not that, it doesn't affect me that much, but it's something I want to bring up as a problem. I do view this as a con to the game. The game should not have hit experience gain this much. They should have just given it a normal amount. Now, some of the Tandor native Pokemon do have decent experience gain. Those are generally the evolved versions of other Pokemon you can catch. That's it. But anything from stage 2 and definitely stage 1 do not give nearly enough experience. The stage 1 Pokemon I get are not supposed to give a lot, but they give less than really what should be considered a normal amount at the level you find those at. That's really it for the experience segment. I'm going to go on to my view of difficulty next. I want to preface this by saying I don't dislike difficult games. I do enjoy playing some games that are challenging. As long as the game interests me enough, I will play it, regardless of how hard it is, and I will learn it to the best of my ability, because I enjoy playing those games. I enjoy playing games in general. So that's why I wanted to state that first, because I do not think Uranium is a hard game. I think overall it's a very easy game that maybe at most will require you to understand how to use held items a bit more effectively if you want to win battles more, and understand how setting up a proper team works. But these are things that even a relative novice at Pokemon can do, and by that I don't mean like set it up in a competitive standpoint. I mean just set it up to be at least somewhat optimal for what the game wants you to have. You won't be able to really get through the game with having a Pokemon with 4 moves of the same type and try to just brute force your way through. But I don't know many people who've actually done that. Generally, most people that I know who play Pokemon have a balanced team of Pokemon who basically are meant to complement one another in the first place. And as long as you play like that, Uranium's pretty much easy. It's like any other main series game. There are only a few moments of challenge, like any other main series game, except the difference is I find the times Uranium tries to be challenging to be kind of unfair. And by that I mean it's not like unwinnable, it's just that I feel that the game stacks too much against you, or that the Pokemon that you're fighting are a bit unfair compared to what you can get, or compared to just, what you have available to you. This is mainly noticeable in 3 fights. That's whenever the 2 times you battle against the leader of Team Nuclear, and 1 potential battle you can fight later on. I'll go over that though when those encounters happen. I just want to state I do not like when a game that totes its difficulty has things that stack against the player, because I find that true difficulty finds a good balance of letting the player have what is needed to deal with a situation while also giving the enemies a chance to win. That's why I like the Dark Souls series. It can be hard, but I've never really found the game unfair. There are only a few moments where I found the game to be kind of cheap, but that was really, I think, Bed of Chaos. That was really the only fight I ever hated, was Bed of Chaos. Every other fight in the game was relatively pretty fair. I like that Dark Souls does that. I like when fights are fair, because it means that when you lose, it is your fault. And I have that as an issue with Uranium. I don't like when a fight stacks the odds against a player. Feel that challenge requires a good balance, and that is possible to achieve. And I feel Uranium does not achieve that for the times where it's hard. And I think that's really the best way I can describe it. There's going to be a few changes to the Pokemon discussion videos. The main one is that I'm no longer going to be doing those, because I personally feel that, one, they're just a waste of time, and not like a waste of time view-wise. I mean, I feel like I literally waste time in those trying to describe the Pokemon, where I could just force myself to describe them using a shorter amount of time by integrating it into my videos, which is what I'm going to do. I was kind of inspired to do this in the first place by Chugga Conroy and the way he did his, but I just can't do it in the exact way as he can, but neither should I really try to do it the exact way as him. I'm going to try to integrate it into my videos though a bit better. So that's going to be the major change going on with those. I just also want this to go by faster. I don't want this to take too long, and I feel like those discussion videos are causing that. In conclusion, I find that Pokemon Uranium up to this point does a pretty poor job at handling its story, and that's about it, handling its story, and I feel keeping the player invested. I find that the most that'll keep the player invested is the fact that, well, we still have to collect the badges, and I guess, wondering more about Team Nuclear, but as I've explained, it really doesn't do a good job at that in the first place, mainly because Team Nuclear is, like I said, it's just gone after this. It's it. We're not dealing with them until we beat the 8th gym. That's it. And I find that the characters in Uranium are just kind of dull. I find that the only ones worth name are Theo and maybe Cameron. Everyone else kind of just is one note. I find that the world doesn't do a decent enough job kind of building its world. There are some minor moments that do have world building, but a lot of it's also kind of thrown to the side. Have trainers spout random memes or do silly things. And it's one thing to try to make the player laugh, but it's another thing where I feel like a lot of these jokes just pull me out of the world. I feel like I'm not playing a Pokemon game. I don't feel like I'm in a Pokemon world. I feel like I'm in just sort of just some parody of a Pokemon game, and that's like the issue I have. And this may interest some people. Some people may like that, but for me, I'm just not a fan of it. I feel that Uranium didn't do a good job of nuclear Pokemon. I'll keep that same opinion throughout the entire game. Like, I'll keep the same opinion of feeling the story kind of falls on its face the entire game. But really, that's about it for this halfway video. I'm sorry this took so long. I've been very busy with college and just keeping, my life together. It's, I've just been very busy. So I hope you've enjoyed this. This has been Fleur Majestrix, and I will be back with the next video as soon as I can.